Carter Hayes had lived alone for 10 years. That was how he liked it. Just him, his farmhouse, and the land he knew like the lines in his weathered palms. Since the war, the silence was a kind of peace. No screaming. No orders. No bodies. Just whine through the corn and the buzz of the old radio he barely turned on. But that night, something was wrong. The wind was too still. Carter sat on the porch, his battered Remington rifle leaning against the wooden railing beside him. A mug of black coffee cooled in his hand, steam long gone. Moonlight poured over the fields in a silver wash, and the scent of dry corn husks hung thick in the air. He squinted toward the rows of crops swaying gently in the dark. Movement. Not the usual kind. Not a raccoon or deer. Something upright. Slender. Too smooth in the way it slipped between stalks. His body tensed. Quiet as a fox, Carter stood and took his rifle. He didn't raise it yet, just held it with the familiarity of a man who knew how to kill. Stepping off the porch, his boots whispered against the dust-packed ground. He moved slow. Deliberate. Like he had all the time in the world and nothing left to lose. Then he saw her. Crouched in the garden, her back to him, stealing carrots with frantic, trembling hands. Her fur shimmered a soft orange under the moonlight, brushed with darker markings along her tail and ears. She was beautiful. In a way Carter had never seen before. Her form was humanoid, yes, but unmistakably other. Fox-like ears flicked toward him as he stepped closer. "Stop right there," Carter growled. The woman froze. Her tail twitched. Slowly she turned. Her eyes, amber and wide, locked with his. There was no anger in them. Just hunger. Desperation. Her chest rose and fell as she clutched a bundle of stolen vegetables to her chest like it was sacred. Carter didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. "What the hell are you?" he asked, voice low and graveled. She swallowed, her lips parting. "My name is Kayla," she said softly, with an accent he couldn't place. "Please! I didn't come to hurt you." He studied her. Fur matted with dust. Clothes torn, barely clinging to her slender frame. She wasn't dangerous, not in that moment. She was starving. On the run. And Carter knew that look. He'd worn it once, too. Kayla didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there beneath the silver moonlight, clutching those vegetables like letting go might kill her. Carter's finger hovered near the trigger. He should have told her to drop the food and leave. Should have chased her off his land like any sane man would. But something about her, those trembling hands, the shallow breaths, the sheer exhaustion behind her glowing eyes, cut through the steel in him. "You alone?" he asked. She hesitated. Her gaze flicked toward the rows of corn. Carter followed it. A pair of small shapes crouched at the edge of the field. Silent. Hidden but not well. Too scared to run. Children. Carter's jaw clenched. "You've got kits with you." Kayla's ears twitched. She nodded once. "Two," she said. Her voice wavered. "They haven't eaten in days." Something sharp twisted in his chest. He swore under his breath, lowering the rifle, but not dropping it. "I ought to run you off. Call someone. Let the damn patrols deal with you." She didn't respond. Just stood there, eyes wide, barely breathing. Carter looked at her kits again, small figures with ears just like hers, crouched in fear. They couldn't have been older than 5. 6 at most. One of them peeked out at him, then ducked back behind his sister. "Damn it," Carter muttered. He turned and jerked his head toward the porch. "Come on," he said. "Before I change my mind." Kayla blinked. "You're not." "Not yet," Carter growled. "But don't think this means I trust you." She stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as though expecting a trap. When her children emerged from the corn, Carter felt the full weight of what he was doing. The girl clung to her brother, shielding him as they walked barefoot through the dirt. Their fur was a lighter orange than Kayla's, streaked with grime and leaf bits. The boy stumbled, his legs too thin to support him for long. They looked like shadows of what children should be. And yet when they reached the porch, the boy reached into the satchel and pulled out a battered carrot. He held it out to Carter with shaking hands. "A gift," the boy whispered. Carter stared at it. His throat worked, but no words came. After a long moment, he took it. The screen door creaked as Carter pushed it open, gesturing them inside. The old farmhouse smelled of coffee, old pine floorboards, and dust. He hadn't had guests in years. He never needed them. The silence had suited him just fine. But now, with Kayla and her 2 kids slipping into the kitchen, that silence felt different. Not unwelcome. Just unfamiliar. "Sit," Carter muttered. Kayla hesitated, her eyes scanning the room like she expected it to vanish if she blinked. She guided the children to the wooden table, and they climbed up onto the chairs like little ghosts, silent, wide-eyed, tense. Carter moved to the cabinets, pulling out a loaf of bread, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. He set them on the table without ceremony. "You're not picky, I assume," he said. Kayla didn't answer. Instead, she broke the bread and passed it to her daughter, then her son, only taking a small piece for herself. They didn't eat like animals. They ate like people who knew what hunger meant. Who had been taught to ration, even when starving. The boy chewed slowly. Then, in a whisper, "This is good." Carter glanced at him, surprised. "It's just bread and peanut butter, kid." "It's warm," the boy said. That did something to Carter. Hit him square in the ribs. He looked away, rubbed a hand across his beard, and grumbled something about not making a habit of feeding strangers. The girl didn't speak. She just stared at him, quiet, sharp-eyed, like she didn't trust him, not yet. Maybe never. "You got names?" Carter asked, sitting across from them. Kayla nodded once. "I'm Kayla. This is Rinny." She motioned to the girl. "And that's Tuvin." The boy smiled, peanut butter smudging his cheek. Carter nodded. "Carter." The silence stretched again. Then Rinny spoke, her voice small but clear. "Are you going to tell the enforcers?" Carter blinked. "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't like em." Tuvin smiled at that. Rinny didn't. Kayla looked at Carter, her gaze searching him for something, truth maybe. Or an angle. But she didn't press. "You can stay tonight," he said after a long pause. "Spare rooms down the hall. Locks from the inside." Kayla's ears flicked. "You're sure?" "I ain't a monster," Carter grunted, standing up. As Kayla led her children toward the hallway, Rinny paused and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said. Carter didn't answer. He just watched them disappear into the hallway. And for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel alone. Carter stood at the stove, the old coffee pot grumbling as it filled his chipped mug. The farmhouse was unusually still, not with silence, but with presence. The kind you could feel in the air, like static before a thunderstorm. He wasn't used to that. Normally, mornings were for checking fence lines and listening to his own thoughts echo around the house. Now, those thoughts were crowded by the image of 3 half-starved strangers curled up in his spare room, one of them with amber eyes that hadn't left his mind since she looked at him under moonlight. Footsteps creaked behind him. "Kayla." She stepped into the kitchen slowly, like it might vanish if she walked too hard. Her fur was still a bit matted from sleep, but her posture was straighter than the night before. She wore one of his old flannel shirts now. He'd left it by the door on purpose. It draped over her like a robe, sleeves rolled up around her elbows. Carter grunted and poured her a cup of coffee. She took it, held it for the warmth, but didn't drink. "This smells like dirt," she muttered, sniffing it suspiciously. He smirked. "That's how you know it's working." Kayla raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She cradled the mug like it was a small fire, soaking in the heat. More soft footsteps echoed in the hall. The kits. Tuvin wandered in, rubbing his eyes, dragging his feet with exaggerated sleepiness. Rinny followed a moment later, eyes sharper, calculating. She said nothing, but Carter noticed the way she subtly positioned herself between her brother and him. Smart kid. You too hungry? He asked. Tuvin perked up. Do you have the warm bread again? Carter cracked a half smile. I got something better. He turned back to the stove, cracked a few eggs into the pan, and let the sizzle fill the kitchen. The smell of cooking food drifted through the air, thick and real. Kayla watched him closely. You don't ask many questions, she said softly. Don't need to, Carter replied. I see enough. Tuvin climbed into a chair, his nose nearly pressed to the edge of the table. Rinny stood near her mother, tense. Carter plated the eggs and slid them across the table. Tuvin dug in immediately, making small sounds of delight between bites. Rinny hesitated, then slowly followed suit. Kayla took her plate but didn't touch it right away. Carter sat across from her, arms crossed. You planning on moving again soon? He asked. She looked up slowly. Maybe. You don't have to. Kayla's ears twitched. You don't even know us. Don't have to. They ate in silence for a while. Then Kayla's fingers tightened around her fork. They'll come looking. They always do. Carter didn't blink. Then let 'em come. The morning wore on with the quiet rhythms of the farm, dust in the air, sun crawling over the fields, cicadas humming in the distance. But this time, Carter wasn't alone in it. He was out by the southern fence line tightening wire when Kayla stepped out of the house, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back behind one ear. Her orange fur glinted warm in the sunlight, and her amber eyes scanned the land like she was trying to memorize it all before it was taken from her. I want to help, she said, walking up beside him. Carter glanced at her, wiping his hands on a rag. You ever fix a fence? No, she admitted, but I can learn. He studied her for a moment. There was no bluff in her voice, just weariness and resolve. Then he handed her a pair of gloves. Start by watching. Kayla followed him down the fence, crouching beside him as he demonstrated how to check the tension in the wire and secure a post. Her hands were small but steady, her movements precise even if unfamiliar. She didn't talk much, but she didn't miss a thing. After a while, there was the sound of hurried footsteps in the dirt. Tuvin. He came bounding down the path like a loose wheel, arms flailing slightly, a grin stretched across his face. Rinny trailed behind at a distance, more careful, her eyes on everything. What are you doing? Tuvin asked, peering over Carter's shoulder. Fixing the fence, Carter said. Think you can handle that? The boy nodded fiercely. I'm strong. That's so? Carter raised a brow. Tuvin grabbed a hammer from the nearby toolbox, which was almost too heavy for him. Still, he managed to drag it over, puffing out his chest like a miniature warrior. Carter chuckled but let him try anyway. The boy took a swing at a nail, missed, and nearly toppled over. Whoa! Carter caught him gently by the shoulder. Try holding it here. And don't break my fence. Tuvin giggled. Okay. Kayla worked beside them, her fingers now practiced, focused. Every now and then she glanced at her son, her face softening. Rinny, meanwhile, crouched near her mother and silently picked up the task, needing no instruction. She didn't speak, but her hands worked just as well. Carter leaned back after a while, watching them. A foxgirl and her two kits in the dirt, fixing a fence on a worn-out piece of land with a tired old man. A strange picture, if you looked at it sideways. But it didn't feel strange. It felt right. Kayla looked up at him. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting them feel like kids. Carter looked away, blinking hard. Don't thank me yet, he muttered. I've got a feeling this peace won't last. By late afternoon, the air was thick with heat. The kind that clings to your skin and makes your clothes feel heavier than they are. Carter had stripped down to a sleeveless work shirt, sweat darkening the fabric along his back. Kayla sat beside one of the raised beds, tail swaying lazily behind her as she wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. Rinny and Tuvin had collapsed in the shade of the porch after their helping, turned into more running and wrestling than work. Their laughter still echoed faintly across the field, and for once, Carter didn't mind the noise. He looked down at Kayla. She had her hands buried in the soil, fingernails caked in dirt. There was a smear of mud on her cheek, and her fur was streaked with dry dust, but she didn't seem to care. "Not bad for your first day," he said. She smiled, just a little. "Feels good to work with my hands again." He raised an eyebrow. "You did this before?" Kayla shook her head. "Not like this. But back where we were kept, they made us work. Always indoors. Always under supervision. Never felt the sun on my back while doing it." The word kept made something in Carter tighten. He reached for his canteen, took a long swig, and passed it to her. She accepted it with a quiet nod. "You never told me where you came from," he said. "I didn't think you wanted to know." "I didn't," Carter admitted. "Now I do." She took another sip of water before setting the canteen down and resting her arms on her knees. Her eyes wandered across the rows of crops, distant, guarded. "I escaped a facility. Government, maybe private. I don't know who ran it. Doesn't matter. They rounded up people like me, non-humans, hybrids, anyone they didn't understand, and locked us away. Some of us were born there. Some were taken. I was one of the lucky ones." Carter's jaw clenched. "That's lucky?" "I got out." He didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he just watched the way her gaze never quite stopped scanning the treeline. "You think they'll come here?" he asked. Kayla's ears flicked, but she didn't answer right away. "They always do. Eventually." A long silence settled between them. Carter looked toward the house, where the children's laughter had finally faded. The world felt heavy again. He hated that. "You ever think about fighting back?" he asked, eyes still on the field. Kayla blinked. "Running has always been safer. Not always better." She looked at him, her amber eyes catching the last glint of sunlight. "No. It's not." That night, the air shifted. It wasn't the wind, not really. It was the kind of shift Carter had learned to feel in his bones, the stillness before something broke, like the land itself holding its breath. He sat on the porch again, rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon where the cornfield ended and the dense treeline began. Kayla stood just behind the screen door, watching him without saying a word. Her ears twitched every time a branch creaked or an owl called out. Her tail flicked once. Then again. "You feel it too?" Carter muttered, not turning his head. "Yes." He nodded, unsurprised. "You think they found you?" "I know they did." Carter stood slowly, slinging the rifle across his back. His hands moved with calm purpose. He didn't ask how she knew. Some truths didn't need explaining. "Get the kids ready," he said. "Just in case." Kayla's expression tensed, but she disappeared into the house without argument. Inside, Tuvin sat cross-legged on the couch, playing with an old radio knob like it was a toy spaceship. Rinny was sitting near the window, still and alert like she already knew something was coming. When Kayla entered, her voice was gentle but firm. "Stay close to me," she said. "No questions." The children obeyed without hesitation. That scared Carter more than anything. He double-checked the doors, the back windows, the crawl space under the kitchen. All things he hadn't touched in years. Now they mattered again. From the front of the house, he caught movement, just a flicker between trees. They weren't alone anymore. A soft knock at the door made everyone freeze. Not a knock, Carter realized. A tap. Deliberate. Testing. He motioned for Kayla to take the kids down the hall. She grabbed Rinny and Tuvin by the hands and vanished into the shadows. Carter stepped to the front door, rifle ready, and opened it just a crack. A man stood at the edge of the porch, arms out to his sides, palms exposed. "Evening," the man said, voice smooth. "Didn't mean to startle you. You're trespassing. Looking for someone," the man said casually, like they were old friends. "Heard a report. Saw some tracks. Strange kind of tracks, if you know what I mean. Carter didn't answer. Behind the man, two others emerged from the trees, dressed in all black gear that didn't reflect light. Not military. Not police. But trained. The kind of trained Carter knew too well. Nobody here but me, Carter said flatly. The man smiled. That's so? 5 seconds to turn around, Carter warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then I stopped being polite. The smile disappeared. Carter fired first. The first shot ripped through the silence, lighting up the porch like a muzzle-flash lightning strike. The man in front staggered back, blood misting into the night air as he dropped. The others scattered like wolves exposed to fire. Carter didn't hesitate. He ducked behind the porch railing, reloading with the fluidity of muscle memory. The bark of return fire cracked through the trees, bullets thudding into the wood around him. Inside, Kayla grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, long, curved, and old but sharp. Her ears stayed trained on every sound, her instincts tuned to threat. She crouched next to Rinny and Tuvin, shielding them with her body. Under the kitchen, she whispered. Now. No! Tuvin cried. Kayla's voice hardened. It's not a choice. Crawl in and don't come out unless I say so. Rinny didn't argue. She grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him toward the crawlspace hatch beneath the table. The boy hesitated, tears in his eyes, but obeyed. Carter shifted position and fired again, catching one of the attackers in the leg. The man went down with a scream, but another one was already circling around the side of the house. They're flanking, Carter growled, moving back toward the door. Kayla was already there. She stepped into the hall, knife in hand, and met his eyes. You got back door covered? Carter nodded. Kayla didn't wait for permission. She slipped into the dark like she'd done it 100 times, her body low, her movements swift and silent. Carter wanted to stop her, but there wasn't time. There was never time. Another shot rang out. Carter ducked low, wheeling around the door frame and putting 2 rounds into the bushes by the fence. A body dropped. Inside the house, Kayla moved like a predator. One of the men had crept in through the rear entrance, stepping over the threshold quietly, thinking he had the drop. Kayla lunged before he saw her. Her blade slashed across his thigh. He screamed and dropped his gun. She slammed her shoulder into him, knocking him into the wall hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Then she struck again, once, twice, until he stopped moving. Back on the porch, Carter fired the last shell from his rifle and switched to the old revolver holstered at his side. He counted 3 bodies down, but there had been 4. Where was the last one? A creak behind him. Floorboards. Too close. He turned just in time to see the 4th man, taller, armored, fast, charging toward the kitchen. Before Carter could lift his gun, Kayla came barreling through the doorway. She tackled the intruder with feral speed, dragging him down. The two crashed into a cabinet with a thundering crack. Carter aimed, but couldn't get a clean shot. Kayla didn't need one. Her blade found the soft spot under the man's jaw. He convulsed once, then went still. Silence. Carter exhaled, shoulders heaving. Kayla stood, blood smeared down her arms, her chest rising and falling fast. They looked at each other, the air between them charged and sharp. You all right? He asked. Kayla nodded. Kids? Safe, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wild. Carter turned to the bodies outside. He holstered his pistol. This isn't over. No, Kayla said, wiping the blade on her sleeve. But tonight we won. Carter didn't like leaving bodies on his land. It wasn't superstition, it was principle. You don't let rot fester in your soil. You bury what needs burying, even if it's the enemy. Even if they came to kill you. So, before sunrise, he and Kayla dragged the 4 corpses beyond the northern fence line. Not far, but far enough that they wouldn't be seen from the porch or found by accident. The earth was hard-packed and dry, but Carter still had the old spade he kept in the barn. They didn't speak much, just worked. Shovel, toss. shovel, toss. Over and over until their backs ached and their palms blistered. Kayla's fur clung to her in damp patches. Carter's shirt was soaked through. The only sound was the scrape of metal on dirt and the hiss of breath through clenched teeth. By the time the last mound was smoothed over, the sky was bleeding orange and pink at the edges. Birds began to stir, and the cicadas finally fell silent. Carter leaned on the shovel, chest heaving. Kayla wiped her forehead with her arm and looked down at the fresh graves. "They'll send more," she said. Carter nodded. "I know. We should leave." He didn't answer right away. The wind blew soft across the fields, brushing against the tall corn and carrying with it the scent of smoke and soil. The land felt bruised, but not broken. Carter finally looked at her. "You always run?" Kayla hesitated. Her ears twitched once, then stilled. "It's the only thing that's ever kept us alive. Doesn't mean it's the right thing." She didn't argue. Just stared at the dirt like it had answers she didn't. The door to the house creaked behind them. Tiny footsteps padded onto the porch. Tuvin stood in the doorway, bleary-eyed and clutching a worn quilt around his shoulders. Rinny was just behind him, silent as ever, her gaze sharp and curious. "Are we going somewhere?" Tuvin asked sleepily. Kayla's lips parted, but nothing came out. Carter answered for her. "No. Not today." The boy blinked. "Why not?" "Because this is our land now," Carter said. "And I'm tired of letting people take what's mine." Kayla looked at him, amber eyes wide. She didn't understand it. Not yet. But she would. They walked back toward the house in silence. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows across the field. And behind the porch, for fresh graves baked under the dawn. The farmhouse smelled of coffee and damp earth. Carter sat at the table, his knuckles scraped, his shirt stained with old blood and fresh sweat. Across from him, Kayla leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her chest still rising and falling in slow, tired rhythm. The children had fallen asleep in Carter's bed, wrapped up in blankets that still held the faint scent of cedar and gun oil. Kayla had tucked them in without a word, her tail curled protectively around them as she sat beside the mattress for a long time, not moving, just watching them breathe. Now she stood in the kitchen again, watching Carter with the same quiet scrutiny. "You don't owe us this," she said finally. Carter looked up, eyes shadowed. "Didn't say I did." "Then why stay? Why fight?" He took a slow sip from his mug, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Because I'm tired of letting people like that win. And because your boy offered me a carrot when he didn't have a damn thing else. That's not the kind of kindness I forget." Kayla blinked, her expression softening. "He does that. I noticed." They stood in silence for a while. Outside, the cicadas had begun their morning songs again, oblivious to the blood that had soaked the ground just hours before. Kayla sat down across from him. Her ears flattened slightly, not in fear, but in vulnerability. "I used to think survival meant staying small. Hidden. Never trusting. Never staying." Carter met her gaze. "And now?" Her fingers tapped the edge of the table. "Now I don't know what I believe." Carter let the silence sit between them like something sacred. "Then, you don't have to decide right now." She looked up. "What if I do?" "Then you already made the decision." Kayla opened her mouth, then closed it. Slowly, she reached forward and rested her hand on the table between them. Not touching his. Just close enough. Carter stared at it, then placed his callous fingers beside hers. That was enough. The following days passed like something out of a dream, too quiet, too calm, and too heavy with the knowledge that peace was temporary. But Carter and Kayla filled the silence with purpose. Carter had her help fix the northern fence. The gate latch had been busted since the last windstorm, and he'd been meaning to patch the irrigation pipe that fed the west fields. Now, with Kayla's steady hands and sharp eyes, he finally got it done. She learned fast. He didn't have to explain things twice. And when the kids joined them, something shifted again. Rinny no longer hovered in silence, though she still rarely spoke. Instead, she listened carefully, mimicked Carter's movements with uncanny precision, and made sure Tuvin didn't accidentally destroy anything with his enthusiasm. Tuvin, for his part, was a burst of kinetic energy, asking questions every 30 seconds, running ahead, getting underfoot, then running back again to report what he'd seen. Once, he returned breathless, holding a frog like it was treasure. "This one's name is Captain Hopper," he said solemnly. Carter nodded like that was the most serious news he'd heard all day. "Well, Captain Hopper's got a long mission ahead of him. Better return him to base before he croaks in enemy territory." Tuvin saluted and sprinted off. Kayla had watched the whole thing from behind a half-smile. Her tail flicked slowly, content. Later that evening, Carter grilled up what little meat he had, thin cuts of venison from last season's hunt. He wasn't a chef, but he could cook without poisoning anyone. They all ate on the porch as the sun dipped low, casting golden fire across the fields. The kids sat on a blanket, barefoot and giggling. Rinny tried not to smile when Carter offered her a piece of sweetbread he'd been saving. She failed. Kayla leaned back in her chair, head tilted toward the sunset, letting the last of the warmth kiss her fur. She looked at peace. "Place doesn't feel like it's holding its breath anymore," she said softly. Carter nodded. "Not tonight." She turned to him. "You're changing. So are you." Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. And just like that, something rooted between them. Not deep yet. Not strong. But growing. Quiet and real. The next morning, Carter found Kayla on the roof. She crouched low, her orange fur catching morning light like flame against the gray shingles. One ear turned toward him as he approached, but she didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed on the tree line beyond the eastern fence. "You see something?" he asked, adjusting the shoulder strap on his rifle. "No." Her voice was tight. "That's the problem." Carter climbed up beside her, knees cracking as he settled into a crouch. They sat like that for a while, side by side, staring into the trees. "Place went quiet overnight," she muttered. "Too quiet. You don't think they gave up?" Kayla shot him a look like he just asked if fire burned. "They never give up. They wait. And they learn," he grunted. "Then we make it harder for them to learn anything useful." That day, Carter pulled out the old tripwire system from the barn, rusted coils, small warning bells, a few retooled sensors he'd jerry-rigged with his own hands a decade ago. It had been years since he'd set it up, but the muscle memory returned quickly. Kayla helped him string wire between trees, laying pressure plates along the eastern and southern approaches. Rinny followed along, memorizing each placement like it was a game. Tuvin tried to step on every rock he could find. By mid-afternoon, the perimeter was laced with traps and alerts. Nothing deadly, Carter wasn't that kind of man, but enough to buy time. Enough to say, "This land is watched." Later, inside the house, Kayla found Carter at the kitchen table, map spread in front of him, red marks along the fence lines. "You planning for war?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Planning for reality," he said without looking up. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers along the edge of the table. "And if they come in numbers?" He met her eyes. "Then they'll learn I've got more than just an old rifle and a bad attitude." Kayla gave a small smile. "You really think we can win?" "I think I've got something worth protecting now." She blinked, ears flattening slightly. He folded the map. "And I think you do too." Neither of them said anything after that. They didn't need to. That night, Carter lit the oil lantern in the living room instead of the overheads. The power flickered too often during the windstorms, and he liked the warmth of the flame. It cast golden light across the walls, turning the farmhouse into something softer, older, almost sacred. Kayla sat on the floor with Tuvin, who was trying to teach her a game he'd invented using pebbles and a spoon. Rinny sat nearby, quietly reading from one of Carter's worn field guides, the pages too large for her hands but clearly treasured. "You were a soldier, weren't you?" Rinny asked suddenly, without looking up. Carter paused. He sat in the armchair, whittling a piece of scrap wood into the vague shape of a rabbit. I was, he said after a long moment. Kayla glanced up. Her eyes searched his face. Not with fear, but curiosity. What kind? She asked. The kind that followed orders. Until I stopped. He set the half-carved rabbit down, running a thumb over the edge of the blade. Did you leave, or did they let you go? Kayla asked quietly. Carter's jaw tightened. I left. Took a long time to realize I wasn't fighting for anything I believed in. Rinnie finally looked up. Her eyes were clear, intelligent, old in a way that no child's should be. Then why are you fighting now? Carter stared at her for a long time, the lantern light dancing in his tired eyes. Because now I am. The silence after that was heavy, but not cold. It was the kind of silence that said, I hear you. I understand. Kayla looked back down at the pebbles in front of her, and moved one with her clawed finger. That's a better reason than I ever had, she murmured. Later, when the children had fallen asleep in the nest of blankets they now called theirs, Carter stood at the window with Kayla beside him. The moon cast pale silver over the corn, the distant fences, the old barn. The land felt older than them both. Kayla didn't speak for a while. Then, if I asked you to keep them safe, even after I'm gone, would you? Carter didn't hesitate. Yes. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Don't say that unless you mean it. He turned to face her fully. I don't say anything I don't mean. She stepped closer. Not touching him, not quite. But close enough. You're the first man I've trusted in a long, long time. He gave a tired smile. Then don't run anymore. Kayla hesitated. Her ears twitched. Her tail stilled. I won't. And just like that, she leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the wind whispered through the corn. And inside the house, for the first time in years, Carter Hayes didn't feel haunted anymore. The next morning came slow, golden, and quiet. Carter rose early, out of habit more than necessity. He expected to find the house still, but when he stepped into the kitchen, he found Kayla already there, tail swaying gently, ears perked toward the stove. She wore one of his flannels again, rolled at the sleeves, her fur dusted with flour. You're cooking, he said, eyebrows raised. Kayla didn't turn around. Barely. I'm not poisoning anyone. Yet. Carter smirked and stepped past her to pour coffee. The pot was still warm. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said simply. She plated the eggs carefully, her claws surprisingly deft with the pan. Tuvin and Rinnie appeared moments later, barefoot and yawning, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They climbed into their chairs without a word, this ritual already feeling familiar. Carter leaned against the wall, watching them eat. Rinnie murmured something to her brother. Tuvin giggled, crumbs stuck to his muzzle. Kayla sat across from them, shoulders more relaxed than he'd ever seen them. You ever have a home before this? Carter asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. We had places. Not homes. This feels like one? Kayla looked at him, her amber eyes warm but uncertain. It could. Carter took a sip of coffee and nodded. Then let's treat it like one. The rest of the day passed with more work on the fences, patching the barn's leaky roof, and showing Tuvin how to hold a hammer properly without dropping it on his foot, again. In the afternoon, Carter found Kayla sitting under the old walnut tree with Rinnie. She was showing the girl how to sharpen a stick with a whittling knife, guiding her hands gently. She's sharp, Kayla said when he approached. Doesn't miss anything. Yeah, Carter said. Reminds me of someone. Kayla shot him a sideways glance. You. No. You. That earned a rare smile. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and cast everything in firelight, Carter found himself thinking about permanence, about what it meant to stay put, to build something that wasn't just temporary. He glanced toward Kayla, who was brushing Tuvin's hair with her claws while he half-dozed in her lap. And he wondered if maybe, just maybe, the running was finally done. Carter had learned to listen to the wind. When you spend years alone with nothing but the earth and sky, you start to notice things most people miss. The way the birds go quiet before a storm, the sudden tension in the trees, the way stillness isn't always peace. That night, he stood out by the fence line, lantern light behind him and a rifle slung across his back. He felt it again, that low pressure in the air, the kind that didn't show up on a weather report. The kind that meant something was coming. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Kayla. She walked toward him barefoot, the night air catching in her fur, her tail brushing softly against the grass. Her eyes found his in the dark. You feel it, don't you? She asked. He nodded. Something's shifting. They stood there in silence, the night alive around them. Crickets, owls, the rustle of wind in the corn. But beneath it all, something was wrong. A stillness beneath the noise. A waiting. You think they're regrouping? She asked. They always do. You said it yourself? Kayla's jaw clenched. Her hand drifted to the small knife she now kept sheathed on her belt, a habit Carter had noticed growing more automatic with each passing day. Then we stay ready, she said. We are, Carter replied. Her tail twitched. I used to think I could outrun anything. That if I just stayed ahead of the next threat, I could keep them safe. And now? Kayla's voice dropped to a whisper. Now I wonder if standing still is braver than running. Carter turned to her. She looked fragile in the moonlight, but only in the way a flame is fragile when the wind rises. Beautiful. Wild. And dangerous to anything that tried to snuff her out. You're not alone anymore, he said. You don't have to do it all yourself. She blinked once, then looked down at the ground. I'm not used to that. Neither am I, Carter said, managing a faint smile. Guess we'll learn together. Behind them, the farmhouse glowed with warm light. Inside, the children slept deeply, safe for the first time in memory. And outside, Carter and Kayla stood side by side in the dark, watching the horizon, listening to the wind. Waiting for the storm. The storm didn't wait long. It came without thunder, without warning. Just boots in the dirt and breath in the dark. Carter heard them before he saw them, movement beyond the south fence line, deliberate and quiet. Not animals. Not wanderers. These were men trained to kill without being heard. He stepped back from the field, rifle raised, breath slow and calm. His eyes scanned the treeline as Kayla emerged from the porch, already alert. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She'd felt it too. Inside the house, Rinny and Tuvin were already awake, sitting silently in the dark by the back wall. Rinny held Tuvin's hand tight. Kayla crouched beside them, her voice low and fierce. Under the floor. You remember the way. But, Tuvin started. Kayla's ears folded back. No arguments. The hatch creaked open. The children crawled in. Rinny didn't cry. She just stared at her mother with a quiet, haunted strength that broke Carter's heart more than fear ever could. Then the trapdoor shut. Kayla turned to Carter. East side? He nodded. I'll take north. They split without a word, slipping into the shadows like smoke. Carter moved fast, circling the barn, keeping his steps silent. The sensor bells hadn't rung yet. That meant the enemy was being careful. Too careful. A flash, metal catching moonlight near the tree line. Carter dropped to one knee, raised his rifle, and fired. The silence shattered. Gunfire lit up the night, short and sharp. Someone screamed, then went down. A second figure returned fire, but Carter had already moved. He slipped behind the tractor, took aim again, and dropped the next man mid-sprint. From the eastern side, a snarl cut through the dark. Kayla. He ran. Rounding the house, he spotted her in the tall grass, her blade buried deep in the side of a man twice her size. Another attacker reached for her from behind. Carter shot him through the throat. Kayla didn't flinch. She kicked the first man off her blade and turned to check the perimeter. 3 bodies. 2 breathing. None moving. They stood in silence, both panting. The wind howled across the field like it was mourning the dead, Carter walked over and knelt beside one of the wounded men, who was gasping and spitting blood into the dirt. "Who sent you?" Carter growled. The man coughed, tried to smile. "You're too late," he wheezed. Carter's gut went cold. "Too late for what?" The man's eyes rolled back. His body stilled. Kayla was already turning toward the house. The trapdoor was open. Kayla reached the open hatch first, her claws scraping the floor as she dropped to her knees and yanked it fully open. The crawlspace was dark, too dark. No soft voices. No whispers. No children. Gone. "Rinny!" she called, her voice cracking. No answer. Carter stepped beside her, already scanning the floor for tracks. Mud. Boot prints. Smaller ones, too. Tuvin's barefoot. Rinny's still and clean. She'd been carried. He stood. "They took them." Kayla's hands balled into fists so tight her claws bit into her palms. Her tail snapped behind her like a whip. "No, no, no, I should have." "Don't," Carter said firmly. "They planned this. A distraction up front while someone slipped around the side." Kayla's breath came fast and shallow, panic rising beneath her skin. "I can track them," Carter said. "But we have to move now." She didn't wait for another word. She was already up, already moving. They followed the tracks out through the back field, past the garden and into the denser brush near the far eastern fence. Carter moved low, rifle at the ready. Kayla moved faster, her nose twitching, ears high and twitching with every breath of wind. "They didn't use vehicles," she muttered. "Too risky. Someone would have heard." "On foot then. They can't be far." They pushed through the trees, moonlight slicing through the branches in pale strips. Carter spotted fresh snapped twigs. Mud streaks. A shred of fabric caught on the fence wire. Then he heard it, soft crying. "Tuvin." Kayla froze. Ahead, just over a small ridge, the sounds of rustling and harsh whispers. Two men, one dragging Rinny by the arm, the other hauling Tuvin over his shoulder. Carter raised his rifle. "Two. Armed. You take left, I'll handle the other." Kayla didn't respond, she was already gone. She moved like a blaze through the grass, silent and fast. The left man never saw her coming, he barely had time to cry out before she slammed into him, blade flashing, blood spraying across the leaves. Carter took aim and fired. One clean shot. The second man dropped like a stone, Tuvin rolling free into the brush. Kayla scrambled forward, grabbing Rinny, pulling her close, whispering her name over and over. Rinny clutched her mother's arm like it was life itself. Tuvin crawled toward Carter, who lifted him up with one arm and checked him over. "You okay, kid?" Tuvin nodded, eyes wide and watery. "That was loud," he whispered. Carter gave a short breath of a laugh. "Yeah. It was." Kayla stood, her daughter in her arms, her eyes burning gold in the moonlight. "I'm going to kill every last one of them," she said. Carter met her gaze and nodded. "Not if I get there first." They returned to the farmhouse before sunrise, each step heavier than the last. The children were silent, pressed close to their guardians, too tired to cry and too shaken to sleep. Kayla held Rinny tight against her chest, while Carter carried Tuvin, who had buried his face in Carter's shoulder and hadn't looked up since the clearing. The porch groaned beneath their weight. The old door creaked open like it knew this house was no longer just a home, it was a battleground. Inside, the warm scent of last night's fire still clung to the walls. The lantern flickered on the table. Familiar. Steady. But nothing felt safe anymore. Kayla didn't speak until the children were asleep again, tucked between blankets like fox kits burrowed in for winter. Then she turned to Carter. Her voice was low and bitter. "They weren't trying to kill us this time." "No," Carter said, his hands resting on the edge of the table. "They were probing. Learning." Kayla's fists clenched. "They wanted to see how far we'd go." He looked at her, eyes dark and hard. "And we showed them." She walked to the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her fur still held streaks of mud and blood. She hadn't even tried to clean it. The rage beneath her skin crackled like static. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No. They'll keep coming. No matter how many we bury. Then we make this place too costly to come back to." Kayla turned, eyes narrowing. "You're talking about war." "I'm talking about making it clear that this is ours," Carter growled. "No more hiding. No more running." She hesitated, ears twitching. "You're willing to die for that?" His answer came without pause. "I've been ready to die for less." They stood in silence, the air thick with everything unsaid. Kayla finally stepped forward, resting her hand lightly on the table. "Then we need to make them afraid." Carter nodded. "We start with the relay tower. That's how they're tracking you. Still active, out past the East Ridge." Kayla's ears perked. "I thought that was abandoned." "So did most folks." Carter grabbed the map from the cabinet drawer, spread it across the table, and traced a finger toward a red mark he'd made months ago, just in case. He never thought he'd use it. "We burn it. Every last wire." Kayla looked down at the map. Her eyes narrowed. Her tail twitched slowly. "Then we make it hurt." They moved at first light. Carter packed light. 2 rifles, a satchel of homemade charges he hadn't touched in years, and enough ammo to make a point. Kayla carried the curved blade she'd claimed as her own and a small bundle of supplies strapped to her back. Rinny and Tuvin stood on the porch as they prepared to leave. The children didn't beg to come. They didn't cry. They understood now. Too much. "You'll be safe here," Carter said, kneeling to meet Rinny's eyes. "The traps are set. No one gets in without me knowing." Rinny nodded, serious beyond her years. "If they do?" she asked quietly. "You'll know what to do," Kayla answered before Carter could speak. "Hide. Stay low. And wait for us." Tuvin clutched his sister's hand, nodding hard. Carter and Kayla disappeared into the trees minutes later, their silhouettes swallowed by the morning mist. The relay tower sat like a cancer in the hills east of the property. A steel needle piercing the sky, surrounded by chain-link fencing and humming electronics that didn't belong in soil this old. Carter had found it years ago, and had kept its location to himself. Just in case. Now, just in case had come. They approached from the south, crouched low in the underbrush. 2 guards. Not many but alert. Carter gestured silently. He'd take the one near the entrance. Kayla would circle to the other. He moved like a ghost, years of muscle memory flowing back into motion. The man never saw him coming. One hard strike to the throat, and the body dropped quietly. Kayla was faster. Her target's body barely hit the dirt before she was already moving again, tail flicking behind her like a banner of fire. They slipped through the gate. No alarm. No movement. Carter entered the main relay housing, a squat concrete box with blinking lights and faint hums of data transfer. It smelled like ozone and machine oil. "This thing's connected to something bigger," he said, crouching by the wires. Kayla set the charges with careful hands, watching the countdown tick as Carter rigged a secondary trigger. 3 minutes, she said. "Plenty." They ran, fast and silent, weaving back through the trees as the tower loomed behind them. Then the ground shook. A column of fire erupted in the sky. The sound hit a second later, deep, brutal, final. They stopped on a ridge and looked back. The relay tower was gone. Only fire remained. Kayla stared at it, wind tugging at her fur. "That sends a message." Carter nodded, jaw set. "They'll get it." They made it back just after dusk, feet coated in ash and smoke still clinging to their clothes. The farmhouse was dark from a distance, quiet, but not too quiet. Carter's heart thudded until he saw a flicker of light in the window. The kids were fine. Kayla climbed the porch steps first. Rinny opened the door before they could knock, eyes scanning them quickly, then stepping aside. "You did it," she whispered. Carter nodded, stepping inside. The warmth of the home hit him all at once, firelight, the smell of soup warming on the stove, and something deeper. Presence. Life. Tuvin barreled into Kayla, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I heard the boom," he said. "Was that you?" She crouched and ruffled his hair with one hand, her voice tired but full. "That was us." Carter set down the satchel and his rifle and exhaled. He didn't realize how tightly he'd been wound until now. Kayla met his eyes across the room. Something passed between them, more than relief. Something like permanence. They sat down to eat in silence. Even Tuvin was quiet, chewing slowly, wide-eyed and drowsy. Rinny remained alert, one hand always near her side, just in case. Carter watched them, these two fox kits who had once crept into his garden like ghosts, now here, in his home, at his table. When dinner was finished, Kayla tucked them into the small room that had become theirs. Carter stood in the hallway for a long moment afterward, staring at the closed door. "You okay?" Kayla asked softly, stepping beside him. He didn't answer right away. "I'm thinking about what comes next." Kayla leaned against the wall beside him, arms crossed over her chest. Her orange fur glowed faintly in the lantern light, casting long shadows behind her. "They won't let that tower go unanswered," she said. "No. But they'll be slower now. Careful." She looked up at him. "You think that'll stop them?" "No," Carter said. "But it'll buy us time." "To do what?" He turned his head toward her. "To build something stronger than running." Kayla tilted her head, watching him. Her ears flicked forward, attentive. "And what is that, exactly?" Carter looked back at the door where the kids slept. "Family." Kayla blinked once, and her face softened. Not with surprise, but with something closer to relief. She stepped forward, took his hand, and for the first time, didn't pull away. Outside, the stars blinked awake, scattered across the sky like quiet witnesses. Inside, Carter and Kayla stood in the hallway, no longer survivors clinging to the edge of a world, but builders of something new. It didn't take long for the retaliation to come. 3 nights after the tower burned, a black transport ship flew low over the eastern ridge, silent, fast, and too sleek for civilians. Carter watched it from the porch, his rifle slung, Kayla standing beside him, her claws twitching against the wood railing. "They're testing us again," Carter said. Kayla's ears tilted forward. "No. They're delivering a message." The ship didn't land. Didn't fire. Just circled once overhead, spotlights cutting across the fields, across the barn, across the house, and then it was gone, vanishing like a phantom into the clouds. Rinny watched from the window, her eyes unblinking. Tuvin curled into a ball on the couch, tail tucked over his knees. Kayla turned to Carter. "Next time, they won't leave." He nodded grimly. "Then we don't wait for the next time." That night, Carter gathered the last of the old supplies from the storm cellar: emergency batteries, trip mines, flares, smoke grenades. Kayla cleaned her blade in silence. There was no panic. Only purpose. They weren't planning to run anymore. They were planning to end it. The final attack came just before dawn. Carter had expected them to wait until nightfall, but these weren't amateurs. They wanted the advantage of visibility, of surprise. They wanted to see fear in the light. But they hadn't planned for Carter Hayes and Kayla Vare to be waiting. Sensors tripped first, sharp pings from the east, then the south, then silence. Carter rolled from bed, already dressed, rifle slung and pistol at his hip. Kayla was beside him in seconds, blade strapped to her back, eyes sharp and unblinking. She looked to the kids. Rinny was already pulling Tuvin into the crawlspace, whispering something that made the boy stop trembling just enough to nod. The hatch closed with a soft click. Carter kissed the edge of the wooden door once before stepping out onto the porch. This time, there were 6 of them. All in black. No insignia. Faces covered. Coordinated. Kayla flanked left, disappearing into the corn. Carter crouched low behind the tractor. The plan was simple. No survivors. The first shot came from Kayla. A low grunt followed. One down. Carter moved next, dropping the lead man with a clean shot through the neck. He rolled to cover as two others fired, bullets tearing splinters from the fence posts beside him. Then smoke. Flares ignited from the fields, turning morning into a red-hued hell. Shadows flicked through the stalks, disoriented. Carter used it. 2 more down. Kayla appeared in the chaos, blades slicing through the fog, fast and precise. She moved like fire, untouchable. The 5th attacker didn't even see her before he dropped, throat slashed, eyes wide. The last man tried to run. He didn't make it far. Carter caught him by the collar and slammed him into the dirt. Hard. "Who sent you?" he growled, gun pressed between the man's eyes. "The directorate," the man gasped. "They want her back. She's theirs." Carter's face didn't flinch. She was never theirs. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the hills. Then silence. Real silence. Not waiting for the next wave silence. But the kind that only comes when no one's left to follow. Kayla stood across from him, covered in blood and smoke and ash, her chest heaving. Their eyes met. There were no words. They'd won. They buried the bodies behind the east ridge, far from the house, deep in the trees where the sun barely reached. No markers. No names. Just earth covering blood and secrets. When it was done, Carter and Kayla stood over the last grave, the shovel still in their hands, the smell of damp soil clinging to their clothes. Either of them spoke. There was nothing left to say about it. Not anymore. They walked home in silence. The farmhouse came into view slowly through the mist. The porch light was on. Inside, Rinny had already boiled water for tea. Tuvin sat on the floor beside the fire, drawing something in the soot on the hearthstones, stick figures, a house, something with long ears. When they stepped through the door, the children looked up. They didn't ask. They didn't need to. Kayla crouched and hugged them both, fiercely, for a long time. Carter leaned against the doorframe, watching the 3 of them like he'd stumbled into someone else's life. "You're bleeding," Rinny said, looking up at her mother. Kayla smiled faintly. "It's not mine." Tuvin pointed to the window. "No more bad men." Carter shook his head. "No more bad men." The words felt heavy. Real. And for once true. Later that night, Kayla found Carter on the porch, sitting with his rifle across his lap, not because he needed it, but because it was habit. The stars above them blinked like quiet witnesses, scattered across the endless black. She sat beside him, close enough to brush against his arm. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "No. You sound sure." "I'm not. But I am sure of this." He turned to her. "If they do, we're not alone anymore." Kayla reached out and took his hand. Her claws were still stained with blood, but her grip was warm, alive. "Neither are you." They sat there until the fire in the sky turned to dawn. And for the first time in a long, long time, Carter Hayes let himself believe in tomorrow. Spring came early that year. The frost faded faster than Carter remembered. The fields, once scarred by footsteps and gunfire, began to green again. New rows of corn, fresh sprouts from the winter potatoes, wildflowers growing in places they'd never grown before. Life didn't ask for permission. It just returned. So did routine. Carter rose early each morning to mend fences, tend crops, and split firewood. Only now, he wasn't alone. Kayla worked beside him, her orange fur catching sunlight like fire in motion. She'd taken to wearing a simple canvas vest over her clothes, a knife always strapped at her hip, though she no longer moved like someone expecting to run. Rinny helped in the garden. Tuvin managed the chicken coop, or tried to, until one particularly angry rooster chased him halfway to the barn. Carter had laughed harder than he had in years. They weren't hiding anymore. They were living. One evening, after supper, Carter stood with Kayla at the edge of the fields. The children's laughter echoed from the barn where they played in the hay. "This place," Kayla murmured. "It feels permanent now." Carter nodded. "It is. If we want it to be." She looked at him, her amber eyes soft. We've spent our whole lives being chased. Hunted. Just for existing. Not anymore. Kayla's hand found his. The wind blew soft through the corn, and the stars blinked to life overhead. You really think we can build something here? She asked. Carter turned to her, eyes steady, voice quiet. We already are. And as the farmhouse behind them glowed warm with firelight, and the children's laughter filled the dark like music, they both knew. The war was over. The running was done. And from the ashes of survival, they had finally, undeniably, begun to live.